Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you've had a wonderful weekend. Well, following on from my previous video about the changes in legislation coming in next month, today I thought I would play devil's advocate, or rather put forward some suggestions as I see them that will probably be Marmite. There may be people who really agree and those who disagree, but I do believe that there is one thing that we are all agreed on is that there is a crisis in the housing sector. Landlords are being pushed out, and I believe that that is to the detriment of everyone. Tenants are struggling to find property, which is to the detriment of everyone. The levelling up debate going through Parliament is not going to make things better, I believe, because one of the key benefits of the rental market is mobility of the population. And these new measures are not addressing that. Simply having open-ended tenancies with landlords needing to go to court to prove that they need the property for their own use or to sell for them to be able to recover their property is not going to help all of the what I call accidental landlords, who are people who may need to rent their home for a year or 18 months or however long because they have a short-term contract in a different part of the country or a different part of the world. And if they wish to recover their property, anybody who's had anything to do with the courts in the last 2-3 years will know that it takes forever. I have a case at the moment which is simply helping a friend who had a leak from upstairs that damaged his flat, and I helped him to file a claim, and it has been a year and it hasn't got to court yet. And ultimately, I've done him more harm than good, because had he have just assumed he was going to get nothing or very little or not contested what he was offered, he could have progressed, repaired his apartment and re-rented it and had months and months of rent, at least perhaps 9 or 10. And in this year, he has had nothing. And meanwhile, the claim is for the original amount. So I don't believe that going through the courts is going to help anyone, certainly not accidental landlords. However, here's food for thought. 8-10 years ago, if I were to have had the opportunity to lease my properties on a long-term internally repairing basis to the local authority at the local housing allowance rate, I would have jumped at it, even though it would have been lower than what I could have achieved on the open market. The fact that I would have known where I stood, I would have known what I'm going to receive and when I'm going to receive it, meaning that the income would have been totally passive, apart from ensuring that I had landlord's cover and perhaps cover for the boiler. Now, I know that in particular in the southeast, that rentals, the open market has accelerated away from the local housing allowance. So landlords there may be sort of gasping for breath at the moment. But I think that we could all agree that there must be, or there needs to be, some sort of median that we work towards to stop the exodus of landlords, to encourage people to invest into property to be made available for people to rent, but for those people to have a secure home, long-term home, and for them not to be exploited. Now, on top of that, another factor that would need to be addressed is when properties with a tenant in situ are sold. The biggest culprits of mass evictions are the buy-to-let lenders, because if you have ever tried to sell a property with a tenant in place, they make your life a misery because they want you and the tenant to jump through so many hoops that it's easier to just evict the tenant and sell the property with vacant possession. So for it to work, legislation would need to be passed that buy-to-let lenders cannot base their decision on the tenant or the status of that tenant. They must purely base it on the value of the property itself, so that tenants do not need to be evicted in order for landlords to sell properties. And if they were to be managed and rented through local authorities, it really wouldn't matter who owned them, because they would be administered to the same standards and to the same rules, and people would know that they have a home, and the investors or landlords would know that they have an income. Obviously, from where prices are or have been recently, that would be quite a drop for many people who I'm sure are screaming at me right now. But we'll see what happens with prices over the next year or two. It is something that could be worked towards. It needn't be done overnight, but I feel that that could be a possible solution. But we all know that's not going to happen. Just take a look at what happened in the last budget. There was absolutely no mention of housing. They did not address the housing crisis from either side of the fence, from the tenants or from the landlords. And meanwhile, they are bringing in more and more measures to eradicate the small landlords from the market, so that their friends in the banks can buy all of the properties. But what he did do in the budget was encourage you to put your money into the stock market. Sell your money, which is secure in bricks and mortar, and put it into the original cryptocurrency, where you could wake up tomorrow and you could have absolutely nothing. I don't know how many of you would be prepared to sell property and just plow everything into the stock market. That's for you. But for me, I believe that if there were a solution where more investment could be made into making properties available for rent, for landlords to be secure with that rent, it will be a great step forward. Just look what they've done over the last few years. First of all, they stopped paying the rent directly to the landlords. I don't know if that's throughout the country. They certainly have in and around Northamptonshire. Why would they do that? What benefit is there by paying the rent to the tenant, who then has to pay it to the landlord? They are simply creating the opportunity for life or circumstances to get in the way. Very, very few tenants set out to fall behind with their rent. It starts off from £100 or £200 and becomes 500, then 1,000, then 2,000 or whatever, and then it is just an impossible task, and then it's all downhill from there. And speaking from experience, it's also from the point of view of the landlord of allowing it to get to that stage. But it's very difficult. Personally, I do not like hounding people for money. I do not like all of that stress. I just want to just invest in a property and rent it out and have an income. And it became such a nightmare, I really didn't want anything to do with it. But then they brought in even more measures where landlords suddenly had to become immigration police. And if you rented a property to somebody who wasn't entitled to work, you had all sorts of liabilities and risks and fines. And then on top of that, if you have a tenant who is on benefits and for some reason their claim is investigated and there is a problem, they can claw back the rent from the landlord. How does that make sense? When a local authority pays for a tenant, the landlord has offered a property or made a property available for that period and has been paid for it. If there is any criminal activity that has nothing to do with the landlord, then the landlord should not be their scapegoat. This is no different to people having to do the work of the cashiers in the supermarkets, and then we face the humiliating prospect of having our bags checked on the way out in case we put something in that we hadn't scanned. Now, I know a lot of people may well do that, or some, but the last time that I had that issue, because I had bought something at the cigarette counter first and then went through the checkout, and they saw me put it in the bag but didn't know what it was, I actually pointed out to them it is not my job to do their job for them. And in future, should they ever do that to me again, then they would not know what would hit them, because that is totally out of order. The same with the government. They make their problem your problem. And this is the end result. I do believe that there is a pathway forward, but it's not going to happen. Having said that, everyone says something is impossible until somebody comes along and does it. So if you have any thoughts along those lines, by all means, let me know. I just wanted to run that by you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And do you feel that it's a fool's errand? Do you feel that it's just inevitable that Lloyds and Co. are just going to own everything and we're going to answer to them? Well, the corporations own the water, the utilities. Our supermarkets are owned by corporations who bullied all of the small shopkeepers out of business in the 70s and 80s, and that's worked out well, hasn't it? Not. Anyway, that's all for today. Thank you very, very much, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye for now.